This is another Soothkeep live stream. This is Lee Brainerd. I am streaming today not from my home in North Dakota. I'm streaming from a friend's house in Florida. So I'm outside of the snow area and we are down in sunny Florida. Up with me and see me. So while we're waiting for that, I'll just move right into some introductions here. Folks, I got a couple introductory matters I'd like to talk about. And one of them is the fact I'm going to ask you for some serious prayer. Ever since I've introduced the pre-trib rapture passages that I found in the writings of Ephraim the Syrian and in the writings of Eusebius, I have been taking some serious heat from the post-trib camp and from the pre-wrath rapture camp. And folks, I'm asking you to pray for me. In theory, as preachers, we should have some very, very thick skin. And I think my skin is fairly thick, but it just starts to wear on me, starts to bear on me. I have people challenging my academic credentials. And folks, I don't have any formal academic credentials. All I can bring to the table is the fact I got 4 decades of Greek study under my belt. I have some competence in Hebrew. I'm able to use the Latin and the German when I need to, and I've even been able to struggle through a little Syriac when there's a reason for it. But I have put a lot of time into Greek, and I do read the Byzantine Greek and the Koine Greek and the New Testament Greek and the Septuagint. And I've done a lot of original research in the early church fathers. And folks like to claim that I have no academic credentials. They're claiming that I have pretending to do original research and I haven't done any real original research. And so I'm just asking you to pray for me on this matter. Um, at any rate, can I get some thumbs up if you guys can see and hear me? I'd hate to find out that I'm talking away and nobody is seeing or hearing me. So anyways, pray for me, folks. Please, please please pray for me. This has been a really heavy burden. I've gotten some emails that have left me very heavy, where friends in different ministries have asked me to respond to people that have written them nasty letters. I'm taking some heat on different ministries' Facebook pages. So I'm just asking some prayer. All right, I've gotten that prayer request out of the way, and one more prayer request. Just pray for the rest of my trip. I'm going to be speaking another 4 times here in Satellite Beach, Florida, before we head back home. So those are my 2 prayer requests. Okay, folks, let's get into Daniel chapter 2. And before I start commenting on the verses, I just want to make some introductory thoughts. And of course, now most of you are aware that the theme of chapter 2 is that there's the great image that was seen in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, an image of gold, silver, brass, and iron with feet of iron and toes of iron and clay. That's a sequence of kingdoms. We're going to examine that. And you understand that this was a heathen king that was given the dream, and it was a servant of God that was given the interpretation of the dream. Now, another point that needs to be understood to understand the message, at least to understand the backdrop of Daniel, is starting in this chapter in verse 4, we are going to see Aramaic all the way to the end of chapter 7. Very interesting because the book of Daniel starts out in Hebrew and it ends in Hebrew. But this stretch here in the middle that covers the times of the Gentiles is Aramaic. There's, there's probably several reasons for this. I think one of the reasons is that the book of Daniel in the times of the Gentiles is something that pertains to the Gentiles. And so it's in the trade language of the Gentiles, which at that time was Aramaic. Later on, it went to Latin, and then it went to Greek, and then on in our modern day to English. Now, there is a point that I should bring out here. It's kind of a technical point, and maybe some of you have stumbled across it in your studies. But the fact that there's a portion of this book from Daniel 2:4 all the way to the end of chapter 7 that is in Aramaic, this is a strong argument for the genuine of the book. It's a strong argument that this book actually was written after the Babylonian captivity. Prior to the Babylonian captivity, only a handful of nobles and people engaged in commerce were amongst the Hebrews who knew the trade language of the Aramaic language. But after the captivity, the Aramaic became the language of the Hebrew people, and it was a mixture of primarily of Aramaic, but had a lot of Hebrew mixed into it. If the book of Daniel had been written at a late date, like the age of uh, later on in the Aramaic age, or even up into the Greek age, which were a lot of people, the pseudo scholars claim that Daniel's written. The book would have been written exclusively in Aramaic. Nobody would have been able to write it in Hebrew because they didn't speak and write Hebrew. Hebrew was still a living language when this book was written. At any rate, now let's move into the outline of the book, and then let's dive right into the verse by verse exposition. The outline of the book in general is for A, the king has a dream. B, the wise men are exposed for being, well, just fake religion. Then there's a prayer meeting with Daniel and his friends, and Daniel receives the interpretation of the dream. Daniel appears before the king and gives the king, not only tells the king the dream, but tells the king the interpretation. This leads to the promotion of Daniel and the blessing of the people of God in a general way, including a blessing that comes all the way down to us to today. And then one last thing that we need to understand is the departure of the Shekinah glory. Because, folks, the times of the Gentiles um, began with the departure of the Shekinah in the destruction of the temple by the Babylonian people. And that's when the times of the Gentiles began. So, with this little bit of an introduction, let's move right into Daniel chapter 2. And I'll just start reading. Sometimes I'll read a single verse, sometimes I'm going to read three or four at a time, and then we will take up the commentary. In Daniel 2:1, we read, "Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him." This was not your normal bad dream where people can go back to sleep. This was a dream that left Nebuchadnezzar so troubled he could not go to sleep. His sleep fled him. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to be around 603 BC. If you remember in chapter 1 with the captivity, we were about 605 BC. 605 BC would have been Daniel's first year of training. 604 BC would have been Daniel's second year of training. And when we come into 603 BC, we're in Daniel's third year of training. Now, I noticed that people are pointing out that there's a little bit of trouble with the sound. Let me know if I just moved my microphone a little bit closer to me. Let me know if that helps out. Okay. And I'm on the road, folks. I'm using my laptop, which does not work anywhere near as good as my desktop. And this is the first time I've ever used my nice microphone with my laptop. If this doesn't work very well, maybe I'm going to have to unplug the microphone and just use the microphone on the laptop. Anyway, well, it looks like a lot of people here are having trouble. If it continues for a minute or two, let me know. We might have to try something else different. Now, so what we have here in Daniel, in the first verse, is Daniel is given a Gentile king a dream, and this dream pertains to the things in his day that go all the way up through the following empires, all the way to the end of the age, and right into the age that we live in. And I want to point out now, this is not the only time that God used a Gentile king for his glory by a night visitation. If you recall, that Artaxerxes had his sleep flee from him, and he sent for the record keepers to read out of the royal annals. And, uh, you know, he was going through some kind of a hard exercise where he was self-examining his past, and something had him feeling uneasy. Well, he called for the record keepers, and the record keepers came and read out of the annals, and they pointed out to him uh, there are certain things that he needed to know, and well, you know the rest of the story. It's in the book of Esther. Well, this is similar to what we have here. Here we have a Gentile king. He's unable to sleep, and I just want to point out, and I know this by my own experience. You know that God has your attention when you can't sleep or you can't eat. If you've ever been in that situation, until you address the situation, you are caught between a rock and a hard place. If you can't sleep, you are not going to sleep until you address the situation. If you've lost your hunger, you're not going to be able to have hunger again until you address the situation. I've had a few times in my life where I've woken up in the middle of the night and I have been unable to sleep. And I sense that I'm supposed to pray, and I just start praying. I start praying for everyone that comes to my mind that I ought to be praying for. Somewhere along the line, I will pray for the person that God is prompting me to be praying for. And once I do that, I'm immediately tired again, and I can fall asleep in just a couple minutes. At any rate, this is what we have in verse 1. God made Nebuchadnezzar so uneasy with the dream he couldn't sleep, and he had to have an answer. When we come into verse 2, we read, Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and we're going to read verse 3 and 4 also. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and this is where the Aramaic starts. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. Now, what we see here, this is just a standard way of doing things if a king wants a dream interpreted. He calls his wise men, and it was a broad spectrum of men, judging by the titles that we are given or the classes that we're given. These men range from scholars to sign readers to spirit world contactors and the priestly caste of the Chaldeans. Now, what's interesting here, even though this was normal for the king to call this class of men to have his dream interpreted, what isn't normal is that he called them in the middle of the night. He couldn't fall asleep again, and he summoned them immediately into his presence. I suspect that this made the wise men nervous. On top of that, there was apparently something in the king's wording that threw the wise men because he wants them to tell him the dream and not merely interpret the dream. And they got this message. They understood that he was not merely asking them to interpret the dream, they understood that he was asking them to tell the dream. That was unusual. They'd never heard that before. They'd never seen that before, and they didn't know what to do with it. Now, normally, what would happen is the king would summon his wise men and he would tell them his dream. And for instance, you can look up in Tremper Longman's commentary on Daniel, and he'll give you a little information on this. But then the wise men would pour over their dream books. Now, the dream books were a compilation of dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of dreams that had been that kings and other government officials and famous personages had, and then they were accompanied with events that happened in those persons' lives later on that were assumed to have something with the dream. So it was a bunch of dreams with events that happened afterwards, which were regarded as the interpretations. And all these experts would just go through these books until they found a dream that was the same or similar to the king's dream or to the whatever other leader that they were dealing with, and they would just match the dream to the dream of the king, and then they would offer a similar interpretation. And this is where the wise men were trying to steer the conversation. They were trying to get the king to tell them the dream so that they can interpret it. Now, the king is obviously unhappy with this situation because he says in verse 5 through 6, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. Notice that he's telling them not only does he want the interpretation, he wants the dream. Now, some versions translate the first line along the same way the King James does, and it says, "The thing is gone from me." And so some take this as meaning that the king forgot what he had dreamed about. I don't think this is correct. I agree with John Whitcomb and many others who've written commentaries on Daniel that it's not very likely that a dream that caused this much commotion was going to be forgotten. I think the true sense of that phrase where the New King James says, "My decision is firm," I think what this is saying is, "Hey, listen, I've made up my mind. The matter is settled. We're not gonna talk on it. This is not a democracy. There's no vote." So I suspect that the king actually did recall his dream in very vivid technicolor, and he was testing his wise men. Apparently, the king had come to suspect that the dream interpretation business was a scam, and he was going to use this opportunity to test his wise men. He was going to kill two birds with one stone. One, he was actually going to try and get an interpretation for his dream that was genuine, and two, he was going to use this opportunity to test the wise men. Now, at this point, his skepticism and his frustration boil over, and he gives them an awful ultimatum. You tell me what I dreamed, and you tell me what it means. If you do, there's a great reward. And if you don't, you're going to be executed and your houses are going to be burned down. This was an unusual demand and an unusual threat. Now, at this point, the we're going to see that the wise men realize they're in a bad way. So they answer again in verse 7 and they say, "Let the king tell his servants the dream and we will give its interpretation." They're just simply reiterating what the position has been and how it's been done for centuries. The wise men um, are told the dream, the wise men look it up in their dream books, and the wise men offer an interpretation. But I want you to notice something here. When they reiterate their same position and just stand on the traditional ground, they are, for all practical purposes, admitting that they are unable to really to interpret the dream. Now, they're just thinking they're unable to tell the dream, but the fact of the matter is, if they can't tell the dream, they don't have the power to interpret the dream, and they're for all practical purposes, they are admitting that they're playing a religious game. Now, the king at this point calls their bluff. We read in verses 8 and 9, "The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time is changed. And therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." In other words, the king has just called their bluff. He accuses them of buying time, and that's what that phrase is. It says, "I know for certain that you would gain time." That's equivalent to the English idiom, "You are just trying to buy some time." You see that I've made up my mind. You're hoping if enough time goes under the bridge, I'm gonna cool off and I'm gonna change my mind. But the king is not going to. He reiterates the ultimatum, "Tell me the dream or face serious consequences." And again, he's implying that the wise men are liars and deceivers, and they are only trying to save their hide. They have no interest. In fact, they got no ability to actually interpret the dream. And the king puts his finger on the heart of the issue. If you tell me the dream, then I shall know you can give me the interpretation. At this point, the wise men get extremely desperate. So we read in verses 10 and 11, The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh." The wise men here are extremely desperate. They realize that their necks are on the line. They are going to be heading for the firing squad. They can't get themselves out of this difficult situation. And at this point, they get bold and desperate, and they all but directly accuse the king of being unreasonable. If notice what they says, there's no man who can do what the king's asking. And that's why no king has ever asked such a thing of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. In other words, you are doing something that's so absurd that no king has ever done it before. So basically, you're the first king that's a serious nutcase. Now, that in and of itself was a very desperate step, and it did not make the situation better. It made it worse. Basically, what they're saying is nobody can do what you've asked us to do. Why don't you just ask us to go lasso the moon and drag it down here? Um, Now, the one thing they did say that was true is that only the gods could do what the king was asking. And but that's only partly true because there's really only one true God that can do this. All the other gods are fake gods. Verse 12, where the whole scene changes. For this reason, the king was very angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. At this moment, their danger went from something that was threatening them to something that now they're facing certain death. Verse 13, the decree went out and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So I sometimes people read through this and I don't think they notice, but what the decree does go out, and Arioch and his crew began killing the wise men. So when they showed up at Daniel's house, they had already killed some of the wise men, and Daniel and his companions were next in line. Now, when we get to verses 14 and 15, Daniel calmly addresses the situation. Then, with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is this decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. I can just picture Daniel standing before Arioch, who's got a bloody sword in his hand, and all the 4 or 5 men with bloody swords. And Daniel just calmly addresses him and says, "Why is the king so angry to kill his wise men?" Now, it's interesting that Arioch took the time to explain the situation to Daniel. He didn't immediately just slay him and move on. This implies that Arioch was reticent to execute Daniel. I don't know if it was because he's didn't really want to kill the wise men, um, but that doesn't really explain why he didn't kill Daniel. I think it implies that he had more respect for Daniel than he had for the other wise men. The king himself had said earlier that Daniel was 10 times better than the other wise men. So I think that Arioch had some serious respect for him. Now, also, I'm going to point out here, I don't think the wise men of Babylon in the immediate context here refers to the wise men over the entire kingdom. Um, like there's going to be people in every city getting executed at this moment. I think it's the wise men of Babylon that were in their offices in the city of Babylon in immediate association with the king. Now, verses 6 through 18 is really where this story begins to turn. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Now, I want you to notice here that Daniel went boldly and directly into the king's presence without an invitation. He didn't get permission from Arioch. He didn't get uh, an opportunity to enter from Arioch. He just went right into the king's presence. This was always risky business. But folks, sometimes extreme circumstances call for extreme measures. Now, I want to point out too Daniel's calm confidence in the Lord. Um, he's not confident in himself. He is confident in the Lord. And now that's gonna make a big difference in your ministry. If men are confident in themselves, then when the going gets rough, the they start to get flustered, they start to flounder, they start to make mistakes, um, and then they lose confidence in themselves. But if you go into a tough situation, um, then and your confidence is in the Lord, then you are going to Um, well, it won't matter what comes because it doesn't matter if it's easy circumstances or difficult circumstances. Your confidence is in the Lord, and the Lord is going to come through on your behalf because you are trusting Him. Now, what's also interesting here is that the Lord or this king spared Daniel. Now, I think that he spared Daniel because he had already earlier regarded Daniel as 10 times better than the wise men. And so maybe at this point he says he desperately wants to get his dream answered. And I think that the king's goal of getting his dream answered was more intense than his anger over the pretenders. And so I think it was just reasonable for him to give Daniel a chance to answer or to um, deal with the dream and get an answer for his dream. But this leads to a prayer meeting. And folks, I do hope that you all have the habit in your life that when you're work for the Lord, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale, whether it's in a big arena or a small arena, that when you run into difficult circumstances, you're going to go beyond your normal prayer meetings and you're going to go into desperate prayer meetings. You're going to be before the Lord. When you're in desperate situations, it takes your prayer to a new level. I think that probably if we understood how desperate the spiritual warfare is around us, and we could see with the Lord's eyes, we would probably have more desperate prayer in our life. Now, they do receive revelation from God, and that's what they were seeking. They knew that they had to hear from God because if they didn't hear from God, then they are gonna perish with the deceivers, and that would be an ugly place to be. You know, we're in a very similar situation right now in this world. A growing percentage of the people, um, in this world, have, no appreciation for any religion at all, and they regard all religion as the same. And they're on a fast track to try and push all religion out of the world. And they're gonna succeed eventually under the Antichrist, except for one religion, and that is the true religion. Folks, the true religion is superior to all the other religions in the world put together. No different today than it was in Daniel's day. And this Daniel was a man of prayer. And his religion was superior because his God was superior, and he was a man of prayer because who doesn't want to pray to the living God in heaven, who's not a stone, who's not a stick, but the God who spoke the universe into existence, the God who sent his own son to die for mankind. This God loves the entire world and wants to bless those that will believe on him. Now, let's move into verses 19 through 23. Verse 19 says, "Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision." I think what happened here with Daniel is he saw Nebuchadnezzar's dream in an instant replay. I think that God allowed him to see the very same dream and to feel the very same feelings that Nebuchadnezzar saw and felt. So in verse 20 through 23, we read, "So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known unto us the king's demand." Now, what a profound outburst of praise. Um, and there's 8 points here I want to point out. First of all, the opening praise is, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever." Now, in this era, we understand the Trinity, and that both the word and that both the word and the name of God were titles for the second person of the Trinity. So basically, what he's praying here is, "Blessed be the Son of God forever and ever." And a lot of God's the Father's communication with man has always been through the pre-incarnate Son. The pre-incarnate Son was the one who walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the garden. In the evening, he's the one who appeared to Moses in the burning bush. He was the Shekinah glory in the temple. He was the cloudy pillar by day and the fiery pillar by night. He's just been the person who's been God's go-between between man and God himself. And this is why in John 1:1 we read, "In the beginning was the Word," which is another one of the titles for the second person of the Trinity. Now, we also read here, "Wisdom and might are his." I love this thought. God is in charge. And we also read he changes the times and the seasons. I think this is not referring merely and only to the fact that we have the annual season changes. I think there's a deeper message here, and that the saints in this day, which we're now around 603 BC, they're only about a century removed from a massive cosmic event that happened in the heavens that changed the length of the year from 360 days to 365 and a quarter days, and shortened the month from 30 days to 29 and a half days. Prior to this time, all the major cultures on Earth had 360-day calendars. Every culture had 12 months of exactly 30 days. Once this event happened in the heavens, and it's recorded in many ancient traditions that there was two gods in heaven fighting. I'll let you determine for yourselves what that is. It's outside the course of my message. But an event happened that when the dust settled and the things that were happening in the heavens finished up, and we had a year that was longer and a month that was shorter, and it threw the calendars off. Ultimately, Solon, one of the seven wise men in the ancient Greek Empire, received the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for calculating the length of the year at 365 and a quarter days. Now, of course, revisionist history in the modern university system says that these early men were so dumb that they actually thought the year was 360 days when it would have been 365 and a quarter from the very beginning. I don't believe that. I believe that the year actually was 360 days. It had 12 months that were exactly 30 days long. The lunar year and the solar year were exactly harmonious. They weren't off by a second. And that this was a judgment from God that created havoc down here on earth. And these guys were aware of it. And so this is what Daniel was aware of this. And he said, God changes the times and the seasons. Now, he also points out that he removes and raises up kings, and you have to understand that God rules in the kingdom of man, and he sets in power whomsoever he pleases. Daniel adds, he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those with understanding. This reminds me of the New Testament teaching that to him that has, more shall be given. If you don't invest what God has given you, why would he waste his precious resources giving you more? But if we take and invest the wisdom that God has given us, and we invest the knowledge he's given us, invest the grace he's given us, he is a liberal giver and he will pour out amazingly. The Bible does say, if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask, for the Lord gives liberally unto all. And we also read things like, seek and you shall find, knock, and the door shall be opened unto you. Another one of the praises is he reveals deep and secret things. You know, I think if people had a deeper appreciation for the fact that God wants to answer the difficult questions and he loves to reveal the secret things in the scriptures, then we would have much more deep revelation from the Lord. He loves to give answers to deep questions. Um, he's a God of wisdom and understanding. He doesn't want to keep us in the dark. Finally, we read, he knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. Folks, nothing is hidden from God. This is an ultimate principle that we need to understand. God doesn't need to search for light. He is light. Now, we're very different. We have to get light from him because otherwise, without light from him, we are in darkness. And I don't know if you've ever thought of this, folks, but the only light that we have in this world is light that we've received from God through the Word of God. And the smaller, lesser light of natural revelation, which is the testimony in nature that there is an almighty, infinite God. This is the light that we have. And if men turn from the natural light and snub that natural light and basically going to embrace atheism and evolution, and they snub the Bible, they have put themselves in absolute darkness, and all they can do is grope through this life, fumbling around, pretending they have brilliant light when all they have is absolute brilliant darkness. And Daniel's closing praise now is he says, you have given me wisdom and might. Folks, Daniel here seems to anticipate his promotion. He's not only thanking God for wisdom, but he's got enough spiritual insight to realize that there's going to be a promotion coming from this. All right, let's move into verses 24 and 25. Therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Now, notice earlier, Daniel had gone straight to the king, and he had just completely trampled on protocol. Time was of the essence. But now that he's got a little breathing room, he follows protocol and goes to Arioch. And Arioch takes and ushers Daniel into the presence of the king. But not only does Arioch usher Daniel into the presence of the king, Arioch takes a little credit for himself. Notice that he says, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Folks, Arioch did no such thing. Arioch did not find a man who could answer the dream. Daniel found Arioch, and Daniel couldn't answer the dream. Daniel very plainly said that it was only God in heaven that could answer the dream. But nonetheless, though Arioch was trying to take some credit for himself here, Daniel doesn't come to the point He's not there to defend his own honor. He's not there to defend his own integrity. He was there for the truth of God and the glory of God, and he goes right to the point. Verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? This is a straightforward question. The king is all business. He wants a yes or a no. He's tired of the games of the wise men, and he's hoping, praying that Daniel is able to answer his dream. Now, Daniel, we read here, it says, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But, folks, sometimes the word but stands out like the rock of Gibraltar. And this is one of those cases. This is a huge contrast. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. Now, I want you to notice a few things here. First of all, Daniel doesn't answer the question directly with a yes or no. He can't do that because he knows that he can't answer the dream. If he said no, it would be wrong. And if he said yes, he'd be taking credit to himself. He clarifies that he can't answer Nebuchadnezzar's question. Indeed, no man on earth can answer that question. But there is a God in heaven who can. So here, Daniel's in a perfect opportunity to puff himself, and he doesn't. God is the center stage attraction. There is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. And folks, if we lay hold of this spiritual truth, this is right at the cutting edge of all victorious spiritual warfare. This is at the cutting edge of all victorious gospel work. This is on the cutting edge of all victorious prayer work, all victorious preaching and teaching. There is a God in heaven who saves. There is a God in heaven who answers prayer. There is, and your prayers getting answered don't matter on what a zealous prayer warrior you are, or that you can pray like a patriarch, or that you pray with emotion and passion. It's simply, do you pray to a God who answers prayer, believing that your God can answer your prayer? It doesn't matter if half the people in the world would laugh at your boring, dry prayers. God doesn't weigh your prayers by how boring your speech is. He weighs your prayers by whether your heart believes that you are praying to a God who can answer your prayers. At any rate, you can take the application from here and apply it to evangelism, and apply it to preaching and teaching and Bible studies, and apply it across the board. But there is a God in heaven. Now, God is revealed wisdom comes to the focus here. He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the last days. Now, here, the latter days equals the last days, or equals the end of the age. Verse 29. And boy, this is where things really start getting rocking here for this whole conversation. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. I want you to notice this. Daniel does more than merely reveal the dream. He reveals that Nebuchadnezzar was laying in bed thinking about matters, and he tells Nebuchadnezzar what he was thinking about before he had the dream. So he answers more than a dream. Why does he answer more than a dream? Because God gave him more than the dream. And why did God give Daniel more than a dream? Because we pray to a God who answers our prayers above and beyond all that we can ask or think. That's why. So Daniel reveals to him more than a dream. He reveals why God gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream. Nebuchadnezzar was pondering the future of his kingdom and the kingdoms that would follow after him and the world that would follow after him. And when God answers Nebuchadnezzar's ponderings, he gives him everything he asked for and a whole lot more. He takes Nebuchadnezzar all the way to the end of the age and the coming of the Messiah. Now, here's another interesting thought I want to provoke you with. Interest in future things provokes God to shed more light and further illuminate the future. Now, what's interesting about this, here is a pagan king wondering about the future, and God wants to give him light about the future and uses the believer to give him light about the future. And folks, right now in the world around us, there are a lot of people that are uneasy about the things that are going on in the world, and they're laying awake on their pillows at night, just like Nebuchadnezzar, uneasy about what's going on in the world. And folks, we have the privilege and the opportunity and the knowledge and the wisdom to give them the kind of answers that Daniel gave Nebuchadnezzar. So what we have in this whole situation here with Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, God intended for this conversation to be a blessing to men for thousands and thousands of years, right up to the end of the age. So we get to replicate and duplicate what Daniel did because we have the words of the conversation and we have the blessings of the word of God. And not only that, but we have more light in the situation than Daniel did because we've got the rest of the Old Testament and we have the entirety of the New Testament. Now, Daniel wants to make sure that Nebuchadnezzar understands that this is not from Daniel. So Daniel wants to keep pressing the point. Verse 30, but as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than any living person. But for our sakes, to make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So Daniel's pointing out here, hey, God didn't give me this dream here because I got a high IQ or my brain is about the size of Einstein's brain. I'm not smarter than the guy next door. I'm nothing special. It's the message that's special. And folks, boy, can we learn a lesson from this because every one of us is a cracked clay vessel, and there's nothing glorious about us except the message from heaven that we bear. And I love this concept because Daniel's saying, hey, this isn't about me. This is about people who need the message. And folks, when our heads get too big, that cracked vessel that we are is going to break, and the message is going to get lost in the environment around us. It's going to get mixed with the junk that's laying around on the ground. So the bottom line here is, folks, wherever we find true spiritual insight and wisdom, it is adorned with true spiritual humility. If it's not so adorned, you're going to have serious problems. Now, Daniel just told the king what happened prior to the dream, and now Daniel enters into the dream. Verses 31 through 32 and 33. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, and part of clay. Now, there had already been a little pleasant shock when Daniel told the king what was going on. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was laying in bed before the dream. But now this shock turns to a massive shock because Daniel says, you saw a great image. Now, the king had been hoping that Daniel would give him the insight, but I'm going to guarantee you that his heart about skipped 100 beats when Daniel said, you saw a great image. There was tens of thousands of things that the king could have seen in his dream. And a man could have sat there and randomly guessed for 2 hours and not guessed what the king had seen in his dream. So when Daniel said, you saw a great image, this is not something that Daniel was guessing. This was simply revelation from God Almighty in heaven. Now, what's interesting about this is Nebuchadnezzar saw a golden image. and this image also had silver and brass and iron on it. But this shiny image is really the times of the Gentiles looked at being looked at from the human perspective. When we look at it later from God's perspective, God sees wild beasts and not wild animals from the forest that we're used to seeing, wild abnormal beasts. And folks, all four of these Gentile empires of the times of the Gentiles are wild abnormal beasts. They're abnormal because there's an element of that fallen satanic spirit element, that Nimrod element that's working in mankind in the mystery of iniquity, and it makes these things perverted. They're not normal. But anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit trail. What we're looking at here is the golden image, the shiny image. This image here is the image viewed from man's perspective. Man sees beauty here, and God doesn't see beauty here. Now we have man's estimate of the superpowers of the times of the Gentiles, and he sees value here. Now, I do want to point out that we keep talking about the times of the Gentiles. That phrase is not used in the Old Testament, it's not in the Hebrew, and it's not in the Septuagint. It's a New Testament phrase used by the Lord Jesus in Luke 21:24. And um, there's a lot of groups out there that dislike premillennial theology and they dislike taking prophecy literally. And they want to claim that the times of the Gentiles started when the Israel rejected their Messiah. And folks, this is simply not true. The times of the Gentiles started when God rejected the nation of Israel and allowed the Shekinah glory to be removed from the temple and allowed the Babylonian captivity to begin. That's the era of the times of the Gentiles. Now let's move into verses 34 and 35. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Folks, I want you to notice that man plays no part in the destruction of this image. The times of the Gentiles do not come to a close because the church rises up and brings about some post millennial coming of the Lord Jesus. And the church is establishing the kingdom. Nope. Man plays no part in the destruction of the image. There's no little tiny ants crawling up there and slowly chipping his head off one piece at a time. The stone is cut out without hands, and that stone cut out without hands is the eternal, uncreated, infinite Son of God. Now, here's another point you need to notice that at the very end of this age, we're going to see the the gold, the silver, and the brass are still in existence at the very end, and then the four empires and the empire building spirit are going to be destroyed forever. So, even though the Babylonian Empire gets replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire in the flow of history, and yet the Babylonian Empire still remains. And then the Medo-Persian Empire gets replaced by the uh, the Greek Empire, and the Medo-Persian Empire, pieces and parts in the spirit still remain. The Greek Empire gets replaced by the Roman Empire, and that Greek Empire, the pieces and the spirit still remain. And we come to the Roman Empire, it splits in two, then it splits into each piece splits into many toes. Um, but that Roman Empire has never ceased to exist. And when we get to the end, all four of these empires are still alive and well, although there's only one that's dominant at any given time. And at the very end, all these empires are still alive. The Lord Jesus is going to descend from heaven. He's going to hit this whole image on the feet, which is going to be the reconstituted Roman Empire. and it's going to destroy the whole image. It's going to destroy the legs, it's going to destroy the brass, it's going to destroy the silver, it's going to destroy the gold, it's going to crunch it, make dust out of it, and scatter it. And there's another point that needs to be understood here. Not only is this empire not dismantled by the church or by man, there's zero overlap between these empires and the kingdom of the Lord. Now, if you want to claim there's a 5-second overlap or a 5-minute overlap or maybe even a 2-hour overlap, I might grant you that. But at the second coming, this image is obliterated once and for all, forever, for eternity. Once the king descends from heaven, the kingdom of the worlds become the kingdom of our God. So Daniel in verse 36 says, "This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king." I don't think this is we in the sense of Daniel and his 3 friends. I think this is the editorial we of the prophets, or maybe you could call it the prophetic we. This is God and I. Verses 37 through 40. Thou, O king, art ahead of a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, and glory, and strength. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heavens has he given into your hand, and made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. And after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Folks, this is history foretold. We understand prophecy literally. Prophecy is just history foretold. Prophecy does not need any interpretive rules that we don't already know from history. And this is just the historical foretelling of 4 successive empires. The first one is identified as Nebuchadnezzar and the head of gold and the Babylonian Empire. And God gave him his kingdom. You have to understand this. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get this kingdom merely and only by his own strength. Uh, God gave Nebuchadnezzar this kingdom, and God gave the kingdom to the Medo-Persians, and he gave it to the Greeks, and then he gave it to the Romans. Sometimes it's difficult to wrap our minds around why God is allowing the mystery of iniquity working through these Gentile powers to dominate the world, but he has his own purposes for it. He's using it to control the ebb and flow of the world. He's using the power to make sure with open doors and shut doors that history flows the direction he wants it at the pace that he wants it, so that at the very time of the end, his kingdom is gonna rise up at the moment he determined it, under the circumstances that he's determined, and the circumstances are that we're gonna have the Antichrist empire raised in its time, and then God is gonna destroy it. Now, notice here too, there's a descending value in the great image. It starts with gold, goes to silver, goes to brass, goes to iron, and then the feet have toes that are iron and clay. Now, there is a decrease in value when we go from gold to silver, from silver to brass, and from brass to iron. However, there's an increase in strength. And I think that's part of the picture here, that as these nations go through history, there's a decrease in the character and the value on that level. There is an increase in strength. Now, the gold was an undivided Babylonian empire. The silver was the divided Medes and Persians trying to cooperate. The Greeks were a very, 3 or 4 factions that were tried to be melded into one empire. They were successfully melded for a while, but the Greeks have division in their blood. And those nations that were welded in the Greek Empire divided into 4 upon the death of Alexander the Great. And, and even today on the map of Europe, nations that were part of the Greek Empire are divided against each other. Now, later on, we come to the Roman Empire, and that was even more disparate peoples and nations welded together into one empire, but they had greater fractions and factions and greater divisions. And ultimately, they divided into the eastern half and the western half, and then they divided into, well, ultimately, it's going to be 10 toes. They're all fractured now. Um, so this is a wonderful passage here. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but we're going to get into this that the fact that the legs and the feet and the toes are mentioned, there is some prophetic value there. Verses 41 and 42. Where you saw that the feet and the toes were part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Now, we've already talked about the Medo-Persians. There was two arms on the chest and the arms of silver because the two arms represent the Medes and the Persians. Later on, we have the Greek Empire, which was the belly. It eventually divided into four. But the Roman Empire was originally unified, and that was just the buttock. But then it divided into two legs, the eastern half and the western half. And the eastern half lasted nearly 1,000 years longer than the western half. The western half fractured and divided after they got sacked a few times by the northern hordes. And then the eastern half basically carried the flag of the Roman Empire up until it was overthrown by the Muslim forces and it was absorbed into the ancient Ottoman Empire. Now, uh, you won't understand the Middle East and you're not going to understand Bible prophecy if you don't understand that the Roman Empire has not ceased to exist. Right now, a lot of people think that the Roman Empire has ceased to exist and it's going to be brought back into existence in the last days. No, the Roman Empire is divided and fractured, but it hasn't ceased to exist. If you look at the government forms that we have in much of Europe today, if you look at the forms of government in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, it is the vestiges of Greek government and Roman government, Greek Empire and Roman Empire. We are still pieces of all this or colonies of all of this. Now, the Roman Empire was originally unified. It split into two. The eastern half dominated longer, but each side fractured and broke into little pieces. Those pieces are the toes in Europe, and they're the toes in the Middle East and North Africa. Some of these toes are iron, and some are clay. Now, sometimes people look at these and they think that the mixture itself is weak. One commentary says that the mixture of iron and clay together would make a plate that's very brittle and it can drop and break. I think that's misunderstanding the message here. It's not saying that the empire together is a plate that can break. What it's saying is some parts of the empire are clay that can be broken and their weakness, but some parts of the empire are iron and they're invincible. And the invincible half of this empire is going to be carrying the field for the day. Now, the what is the iron and the clay? I suspect that the iron and the clay is simply democracy and the Islamic world. The democracy in the Islamic world have never mixed very well. You can maybe simplify this even a little more, just Western culture and the Islamic culture. The We have a lot of situations in Europe where the Muslims have not mixed very well into Europe. Now, some have, thankfully, the moderate ones have, but there's a lot that don't mix well. And when Europeans pocket up in the Arab nations, there's restrictions and there's uh, functions of society that the Europeans don't mix very well in, and some they're banned from. So you have the two cultures are just not mixing. Now, this doesn't mean that the empire is going to have weakness in the whole. It just means that some parts of the empire are clay and they are going to be weak. There's disunity in the unity. Now, verse 43 here says, "And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." Now, there's an interesting allusion here because we've already talked about the iron and clay not mixing. And this seems to be using the iron and clay not mixing to piggyback into a different issue or to stray into a little rabbit trail on a different issue. I don't know much about this subject, but I'm only going to make a couple brief comments here. One that when it talks about mingling with the seed of men, this reminds me of Genesis 6. Now, I'm not going to go down that. I'm if other brothers want to go down that subject and develop it, that's fine. This is one that I have not put a lot of time into. I'm just aware of the subject, and it's not one that's been a huge issue for me that I feel a great desire to do a lot of investigation in. I'm just going to point it out that this reminds me of Genesis 6. There seems to be an element here where involved in these four great empires of the times of the Gentiles, there are elements in those empires that are not merely and only human. They have the same satanic influence that's been since the Tower of Babel. Now, you can develop this further on your own. You can investigate it on your own. I'm just pointing out that just as the iron and clay don't mix in the Roman Empire, so there's another non-mixing going on here. That there's some powers here that's not mixing with the seed of men. And I'll just leave it at that. Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. In the days of these kings is in the days of the 10 kings at the end of the age, the 10 kings who are going to reign with the Antichrist as kings. Now, I want you to notice, if you haven't ever noticed this before, God is going to set up a kingdom at the second coming, and notice that kingdom shall never be destroyed, that kingdom shall never be left to other people, and that kingdom shall stand forever. Sometimes people get confused when they address the 1,000 years, and they treat it like the 1,000 years is a standalone kingdom that is unrelated to the eternal kingdom. And I don't think that this is accurate. The 1,000-year kingdom is quantitatively, but not qualitatively distinct from the eternal kingdom in some ways. There is one qualitative distinction between them, and that is that the 1,000 years is the overlap between the era of salvation dispensations and the eternal kingdom. I want you to think about this. During the 1,000 years, men get the most light and the most gospel privilege they have ever had. It's mixed with the removal of the curse and a taste of all the blessings of the eternal kingdom with the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ down here on earth, perfect government, perfect education, perfect economic system, perfect climate. But in spite of all this, there are still unsaved people who are going to be born into this kingdom, who are going to reject this blessing, and it will be the last opportunity to be saved. So we got 1,000 years, which is the last opportunity of salvation, which at the same time is the beginning of the eternal kingdom. Now, at the end of the 1,000 years, the Antichrist um, type situation is going to be repeated. We're going to have the Satan is going to be loosed, and he's going to round up a bunch of his uh, troublemakers down here on earth, but I want you to understand something. The rebellion at the end of 1,000 years does not take over the world. I think some people are confused here. It doesn't take over the world system. It doesn't take over any city or state in the world. All this is a large protest that gathers in Jerusalem. They don't overthrow the Lord's kingdom. They want to overthrow, but they never go beyond the protest stage. They're little more than an armed protest. At any rate, I'm just gonna leave that thought there. You guys can chew on that one and develop that one. Um, I don't think that they're gonna defile the world as a whole. The defiled people that want to defile the world are gonna gather at Jerusalem, and then they're gonna be destroyed. Um, when we move into verse 45, for as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Now, this is a reiteration of points that have been made earlier. There's a stone that's cut out not with hands. It's the uncreated eternal Son of God. We have the destruction of all the remnants of the former empires, as well as the current empire. And we have God revealing future events to Nebuchadnezzar that involve Nebuchadnezzar and the successive empires all the way to the end. And then the last thought here is the dream is certain. And basically, you're saying the dream is certain, you can bank on it. The interpretation is certain, you can bank on it. Now, the last next two verses here we read, then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing you could reveal the secret. Now, this has thrown a lot of people because Nebuchadnezzar falls down on his face and worships Daniel. And they're just pulling their hair out of their head because why would Daniel let himself get worshiped? Why would a man accept worship? Why didn't Daniel say something or do something? Folks, this Nebuchadnezzar was not technically worshiping God. He wasn't ascribing deity or godlike status to him. He was just formally and highly honoring him. He was owning Daniel's superiority, not his divinity. Daniel would not have submitted to this worship were it actual worship, were it Daniel getting worshiped as if he were God or nearly like God. In fact, the next verse honors Daniel's God as the God of gods and the Lord of lords. So don't get thrown by the terminology here. Step back, look at it from a little bit broader perspective, and realize that this is just Daniel's superiority being honored and not his divinity. All right. We come to the last two verses now. Daniel 48 and chapter 2. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. There's some wonderful thoughts here, folks. Sometimes when we take big risks to defend and promote the glory of God, the Lord's blessing involves more than spiritual blessing in the things of God. And if this happens in your life, I am so thankful for you. Now, I haven't had this kind of blessing bestowed on me in this life, and I don't. However, it does happen at times. So, but one thing you can bank on, if you do take big risks to defend and promote the glory of God, you are going to be blessed. You may not be blessed with worldly power, influence, but you will be blessed. And here we see Daniel elevated in the world in rank and in wealth. He was over the province of Babylon, and he was head over all the wise men in Babylon. That must have been a hard pill to swallow for all those wise men to have this lowly Jewish boy promoted over all of them. Well, he was still a young man. But sometimes God uses the weaker vessels, He uses the younger vessels. He uses whomever He chooses to use. Folks, maybe some of you are gonna scratch your heads and wonder where I'm going with this, but folks, He sometimes even uses the ladies. Um, and I don't believe that it's right for women to be in the pastoral office or to have that kind of authority over men, but God has used many women mightily in other areas in the work of God, and women are just as important in the work of God as men. Anyway, that's a little rabbit trail for you. Last verse. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Folks, this wasn't mere nepotism. It wasn't throwing some bones to his friends. Daniel was much more spiritual than that. He was much wiser than that. He knew that his friends would be a blessing to the king and his government. All right, I just noticed I'm done with my message, and we're going to open it up for questions here. I'm sure that I have already had a bunch fired off to me that are going to be on my phone. So I'm going to take the time here to look those questions up, but I do notice some people saying hi and some people saying they're in Florida and looking for me. So we'll see what happens. Uh, maybe some of you show up to the meetings here. We've got meetings tomorrow morning here at Bethany Bible Chapel, breakfast, starting at 9 o'clock. Okay. Now, oh, this is rough. I'm not sure what's going on, folks, but we had sketchy audio here. I knew we had sketchy audio, and uh, my moderators had a 3-minute lag on their devices, so they had a hard time with the questions. But I do have a few here. Um, is the rock that breaks the second statue a meteor? No, the rock that breaks the statue is going to be the Lord Jesus Christ himself. Here's another question. Why did Satan stop Gabriel from getting to Daniel during his prayer and fasting? Well, the same reason that the devil or one of his assigned angels hinders you on every one of the efforts that you do for the work of the living God. This I love that passage because there are times in the work of God when I'm wondering why a brother A or brother B didn't come through for a particular situation. And you know what it is? It always is. The work of the Lord has them hung up, and the devil has them hung up, and the devil's got me hung up, and he's continually hanging us up, continually bogging us down in the work of the Lord, continually trying to hinder the work of the Lord. It just happens, and we just need to understand it and live with it. Okay, here's another question. Did he address the 2,300 days in Daniel chapter 8? Okay, let's pull up the 2,300 days in Daniel chapter 8. In the 2,300 days in Daniel chapter 8, you look at the context, this is talking about the typology of the abomination of desolation that happened under Antiochus Epiphanes, and the 2,300 days in this context here, and you can look this up in any commentary that takes prophecy literally, uh, those days are going to be counted from the time the pollution started until the time the pollution was purged. Okay. Question. Do you think the toes are half human and half machine? No. There might be um, some transhuman soldiers by the time we get that far that are gonna be half human and half machine, or at least 90% human and 10% machine. Um, but no, those 10 toes are actual human nations. Question: why were the powerful kingdoms of Assyria and Egypt in the statue? I'm not sure what the question is. Um, why were they in the statue or why were they not in the statue? I'm gonna answer it as if why were they not in the statue? Because, the times of the kingdoms of Assyria and Egypt preceded the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles started when the Lord took the kingdom away from Israel and gave that whole region of the world that Israel was supposed to dominate to the kingdom of God and gave it to successive Gentile powers. Okay, question. Crushed together, do they perhaps all rise in the last days? Um, every one of these empires is probably going to play some kind of a significant part in the last days. They will be crushed together in the last days. I suspect that, for instance, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Iran, we see that associated in the Gog and Magog um, war very prominently. I wouldn't be surprised if Iraq is also in that picture. The Greek and Empire, Roman Empire pieces are very much going to be involved in the Roman Empire. So yes, they'll all be in the last days. Okay, question. Could that stone also represent a physical meteor as well? No, I don't think so. But there will be a lot of meteors in the last days. We see a number of them in the book of Revelation under the trumpets, and those are just some of the rocks that are going to fall from heaven. Question: what do you think about the clay and iron mixed artificial intelligence or with Nephilim? Well, I do think, as I pointed out on one and the very end of the iron and clay passage, that there does appear to be an allusion here to whatever you want to call it, the Nephilim problem, or if you want to call it the seed of the serpent problem, or if you want to call it just the angelic mixing with man and mingling with man, whatever, however you want to explain it, there does seem to be an element of that there. But I think that it's being compared to the toes of iron and clay. The toes of the iron and clay are simply the fractured pieces of the Roman Empire that don't mix very well, being held together by satanic power. Okay, here's another question. Do you see the fire in the furnace as the same as the bush burning and didn't burn up? Um, the fire in the furnace was Satan's fire, and the fire in the burning bush was God's fire. Um, now, what's interesting is with God's fire, the bush didn't burn, and with the devil's fire, the godly didn't burn. The Ark of the Covenant, too, I'm not sure exactly how the ark fits in with the fire, but the ark does involve the glory of God. That's for sure. Question: who do you think the 10 toes represent? They represent former pieces of the Roman Empire that's been fractured. Um, exactly who they're gonna be, that's of course, that's another question. I wouldn't be surprised if it involves nations like the western half, Spain, France, England, but it might be a couple of these together because Europe will be 5 toes, I suspect, and then the Middle East and Africa will be 5 toes. Is there a chance, Lee, that we may stay in heaven during Christ's thousands year reign? Well, I think there's a certainty that we're gonna spend some of the 1,000 years in heaven, in the New Jerusalem visiting because, uh, we're gonna be fellowshipping with the Father as well as the Son. Um, remember it says, "In that day you shall ask the Father in my name." If we're down here only on earth and the Father's physically located in the New Jerusalem and we're not going to the New Jerusalem, we don't get to ask our questions of the Father in the name of the Son until after the 1,000 years. But now, after the 1,000 years, the Father is going to come down here to earth. So we're going to spend the 7 years after the rapture in the New Jerusalem. Then we're going to come to reign on earth. During that reign, we will have regular trips back and forth to the New Jerusalem. At least that's how I understand it. Okay. Yay! Prophecy Watchers apparently was on watching. Fantastic. Praise the Lord. And by the way, if you're still listening, Prophecy Watchers, I know I gave you my word. I'm gonna have to get on your Facebook page and I'll deal with the naysayers, the gainsayers that are all hot and bothered about the pre-trib rapture passage, the early church father. Apparently we've dropped the nuclear bomb on them between you guys interviewing me and Lamb and Lion interviewing, and that just seems to have just stirred up the hornet's nest, but we'll take care of that. By the grace of God, we will. Okay. Question: do you believe the statue coincides with the beast in Revelation? Uh, the, the toes, the feet with the 10 toes corresponds with that beast empire in the book of Revelation. Um, Question of Job 33:6. I too was formed from clay. Hmm. Not really sure what they're going after here. Perhaps I can come back to that one later. I'll continue with these other questions. Would the Club of Rome's 10 economic sectors satisfy the 10 toes prophecy? It's possible, folks. It's very possible. But here's the thing you need to understand about what's going on right now with the New World Order. Right now, there are 7 or 8 very powerful forces on Earth jockeying to have their version of the New World Order dominate the entire world. Um, we have uh, the Muslim version that would like to dominate the world. We have the Roman Catholic Church version. We have the big bankers and the big economic powerhouses. And we have the secret societies that have their own version of it. We have the European version. We have the American version. We have the American left version and the American right version. There's the Chinese version. There's the Russian version. And then within Islam, there is the Sunni version and the Shia version, and then maybe some generic conglomerate of all of Islam together. There's all these different versions jockeying for power. When it's all said and done, the only real options that can be considered for the Roman Empire are the former states of the Roman Empire, the big banking industry that's dominated by America and England, the secret societies dominated by America and England. America, Europe, Australia, Canada could be observed, maybe regarded as colonies from the Roman Empire that might have a part in this picture. This is really all that we're left to, that we can regard as part of who's ultimately be the 10 toes. Now, personally, if the UN version comes to power, then you've got 10 sectors of the world dominated by the UN. I personally don't think that that's going to be the version that's going to come to power, although they would love to be. I personally think the version that's going to come to power is going to come to power after the Gog and Magog juggernauts destroyed by God. Europe and whoever is allied as colonies of Europe is going to come to power as the Roman Empire. And that Roman Empire is going to be divided into 10 pieces. And I'm not exactly sure how, but that Roman Empire is going to dominate the entire world. One last question here we have. Question, but Jesus was in the furnace. At some point, the fire changed, right? They don't smell like smoke. That seems more like God's glory. How I would explain that is that the fire wasn't God's glory, but God's glory was manifested in the fire. He preserved those people. Okay, now here is this question again on Job. So let's go back to that Job question and let's look this one up. This is a question I've never had before. So we've got to go to Job 33:6. Okay. Okay, and here we read, truly I am as your spokesman before God. I also have been formed out of clay. This is this would have been my first guess. I think this is just saying I too am a human being. That's how I take it. Okay, let's see here. We have yeah, here someone says, "Do you know that Trump has a plan to control the globe with 10 generals?" Well, wouldn't surprise me. I'm surprised I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of plans that people have to try and dominate this world. It's going to be interesting to see whose plan comes to pass. Um, now, anyone else got any more questions they'd like covered on this? I think I pretty much cleaned up the questions that Ruthie sent me. Here, someone makes a comment. I think the Vatican will be the harlot, and that is my opinion too. Um, I don't see it'd be hard to find any identification for the whore that rides the beast other than Rome. Probably Rome dominating all the religions of the world and not merely related to, or not merely limited to the Roman Catholic Church. Time is going to tell. Sometimes our speculations on the subject are going in the right general direction, but they don't absorb all the details that they should have. All right, we are at now at 11 o'clock. We've been rolling for an hour and a half. If you got a few more questions, fire them in. Otherwise, I'm going to wind this thing down. It's been a real long day for me, folks. I'm glad you all showed up. I'm glad we had Daniel chapter 2. Here's a question. Do you think that Yuval will be the false prophet? Um, Probably not. But I think there's a whole handful of men like him that obviously are manifesting the spirit of Nimrod or the spirit of the Antichrist. Someone says they love my food and heaven talks. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a live stream on why I believe that we're gonna be eating meat in eternity. I'm not getting enough hate mail over the pre-trib rapture, so we're gonna have to up the ante here and see if we can get a little more hate mail coming in. Yep, someone says, "I can't wait for Daniel chapter 5. My favorite verse is he loosed his loins." Yeah, well, and I'm not gonna share you my paraphrase. You'll just have to kinda read between the lines. All right, folks, I'm gonna wind it up. I'm gonna visit with my friends, that I'm staying with before I go to bed tonight. I appreciate you hanging with me for an hour and a half. I apologize for the microphone issues and for some of the other issues we've had. Well, you're dealing with a guy here who's a book nerd. He's not a technology nerd. So you should be very thankful that I can even figure out how to use a microphone. But I will, I promise you, I will put a little time into this tech stuff and figure out how to make my laptop and my microphone and my video work better when I'm on the road. So God bless you all. I love you all. Look forward to another time. And wow, um, I'm tell you what, folks. I'm just going to say this here too. I'm very glad you're watching my stuff. But folks, if you get a chance to go hang with Mondo and Tyler and watch their interview that they did with Pete Garcia on the gospel, the everlasting gospel, the eternal gospel, I want to encourage you to watch that sometime over the next few days. Make sure you take that in. This gospel, folks, that we're saved not by law but by grace. This is one of the most important messages of the day, and that gospel message is just as true for the tribulation as it is for now. Anyway, folks, just wanted to throw that out there for you. I love y'all. I love my bros that are out there doing the work of the Lord. Prophecy Watchers, Lamb and Lion, Bro Tyler, and Bro Pete. Love y'all. And there's a lot of dear brothers out there too. My dear bro Pablo out there in California. Can't leave him out. Anyway, folks, have a good evening, and we'll see you all next time.